U.S. citizens in China have been advised to exercise extreme caution, according to a new U.S. State Department security alert. What's the significance of the move? And go offline or go home? The fate of tens of thousands of international students in the U.S. may hang in the balance after the administration issues a new rule on online classes. Why and what's the potential damage? Welcome to The Point, an opinion show coming to you live from Beijing. I'm Li Xin. The U.S. State Department warned its citizens in China to exercise increased caution last Saturday, citing a heightened risk of prolonged interrogations and extended detention for reasons related to state security. Just one day earlier, U.S. President Donald Trump said the relationship between the U.S. and China has been severely damaged in recent months, and he wasn't even thinking about phase 2 of the trade deal, adding more uncertainty potentially to bilateral ties. Now, given observers in both countries agree the relationship is at its worst ebb in decades, what explained the U.S.'s recent warning, and how could China reassure the U.S. of its sincerity in dialogue and engagement? Joining me for the discussion in Beijing via Skype is Wang Huiyao, president of the Center for China and Globalization, and from Memphis, Tennessee, the United States, Professor Josef Mahoney at East China Normal University. Gentlemen, welcome to The Point. So on Saturday, the U.S. State Department warned Americans in China to exercise increased caution. The alert said U.S. citizens may be subjected to prolonged interrogations and extended detention for reasons related to state security. Security personnel may detain and/or deport U.S. citizens for sending private electronic messages critical of the Chinese government. In response, China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said the U.S.'s alert is obviously paranoid, trying to find an excuse for trampling on the legitimate rights and interests of Chinese citizens in the United States. This is not the official translation, of course. It was originally in Chinese. So, Professor Wang, the U.S. State Department did not say what led to the alert or provide any examples of U.S. citizens being detained or deported by China. What do you think prompted the new security alert, or what could have prompted the security alert?
Well, I think that U.S. may be overreacting or oversensitive. Because first of all, I think recently, as you said, President Trump really had no confidence of a China-U.S. relation. He has been saying things that even no confidence of phase 2 agreement, or even not interested. But second, the FBI director actually about a week ago gave a talk at Hudson Institute, and he talks about there's a large percentage of what the cases of investigation going on involve Chinese espionage, spy, intellectual property theft. So as a matter of fact, probably Justice Department and FBI already arrested a few dozen of Chinese or American Chinese already. So they were worried about any reaction from China. So I think that's probably one of the reasons as well. And thirdly, maybe also recently
Yeah, so basically, let me interrupt here. So basically you're saying because of what the United States have been doing to Chinese nationals or Chinese residents in the U.S., they are afraid that China would retaliate against U.S. residents or U.S. citizens residing in China. Mr. Wang, is that what you were saying?
That's possible. That's possible, the reason. I mean, otherwise I don't see. Because nowadays there's no travel anyway. There's very few flights and there's no citizen travel. So issue such kind of warning basically is really not really meaningful, but just to help to intensify the deteriorated situation. But I would say because U.S. has already arrested or maybe has already made a lot of moves on that, and also FBI has been giving talks, and the National Security Advisor has been giving talks. All very inactive on China, so they probably worry some of the reactions from China, and then also taking this as a precautions warning as well possible.
Professor Mahoney, what is your reading of the possible reasons behind such an alert? Normally, you would issue such an alert under the circumstances that you have, for instance, discern or notice an onslaught or maybe an emerging trend where your citizens, but you have to have signs, right? You have to have already incidents where citizens of your country have been subjected to this or that kind of bad treatment, so you would send out an alert to warn people. In this case, have there been any incidents of, to your knowledge, that point to a potential risk in this direction?
I don't think so. I think on the one hand, part of this is still being driven by Washington's reaction to the new Hong Kong security law. You know, there were reports last week of a lot of Hong Kong dissidents deleting their accounts. A lot of this was covered in the American press, that people had to hide what they had said because these would now be covered and subject to the new law and possible ramifications. But aside from this, I think that whether or not, I wasn't clear on the first speaker's point, but the question you asked, whether or not this was in some way trying to cover for some of the things that are happening to Chinese in the United States, I think it is. But I think more than this, you know, we have long known that wherever you are, whether you're not in the United States or in China, that you have to be careful about what you say. You know, I have colleagues in the United States who have lost their jobs in universities because of things that they posted on Facebook and Twitter. I've had friends in Hong Kong who lean in the direction of Beijing, who've not been promoted and faced other issues. So everywhere in the world right now, we have to be careful about what we say, but I don't know of any cases where actual U.S. citizens have been detained in China or faced this sort of scrutiny.
Yeah, so because this is, you know, a little bit strange, all of a sudden Americans living in China receive these messages, and some of them are scratching their head, you know, why now, for instance, and is there something which has already happened to their U.S. compatriots in China that is not known to them, especially when you talk about prolonged interrogations and extended detention. You need to have a basic ground, you know, you need to have some kind of ground in order to make this kind of, in order to project this kind of possibility, Mr. Wang.
Yeah, no, I think could be another incident is that I heard from the social media that there is a professor from Tsinghua University probably get a little temporarily you know, held for the last week. But I was also seeing news that he was released already, and I know Pompeo has been calling for release of this intellectual. So that could be also another reason, even though he may not be a U.S. citizen or not. But that could be another case of recently what's happened, but actually China has already, you know, that has been already released. So I don't know. Would that be also partly contribute to this caution or not?
But what could be the possible ramification of this kind of messages? It's sent, you know, to everybody, as many as possible, although some people might not have gotten it, such as my American colleague, but I would say the great majority of Americans who live in China might have already gotten it. Professor Mahoney, you're now living in the United States, but you have been in China for a long time, possibly you still have your Chinese phone on. Did you receive such a message, and what do you think the effect would be of such a message on the psyche of the Americans living in China and possibly on the already quite tensed relationship between the two sides?
Well, I think, first of all, you know, I still work for East China Normal University, and I still am tied into their network. And I'm only here as a visiting scholar, but then stuck because the border is closed. But I think in terms of, I haven't seen the message. If I did receive it, it was probably spam and went into my spam box, and I don't check that on a regular basis. But I should say that, you know, we receive, and not just me, but Chinese colleagues constantly are barraged by anti-China emails. I haven't seen any from the U.S. government, but we receive them from all sorts of sources around the world. trying to tell us about the real China, despite the fact that they're originating from places that have no connection to the real China whatsoever. So I think that, again, I think what's being said in whether or not there's been a message that's gone out to others, I think this is an effort to demonize and further undermine U.S.-China relations. I think it's designed to spread fear among the American expats living in China, most of whom have a very comfortable, who have a very secure, feel even more secure in China than they do in the U.S., not just in terms of personal security and political security, but also in terms of their health at this point. So there are a lot of ironies at work, but I don't know how this will really affect anyone who's chosen to live in China and will continue to do so.
Chinese State Councilor and Foreign Minister Wang said last week that the current China policy of the United States is based on ill-informed strategic miscalculation and is fraught with emotions and whims and McCarthyist bigotry. So, Mr. Wang, is this alert the latest demonstration of such thinking?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think that the
yes
election
or no?
is coming in November.
Yes or no?
Oh, I think yes. Yes, because they do show some kind of bashing China because it's going to score political points when the election season is coming, and we see that very obvious. I mean, there is already the American Pompeo and FBI Director, National Security Advisor all come up to speak on China. And anti-China has already become the political correct in the U.S. politics. So that's very dangerous and not really to jeopardize the relationship between the two countries that have been built up in the last 4 decades. And I think there's still a lot of people-to-people exchanges, a lot of business exchanges. We hope that won't be too much deteriorate to the point of no return. We really hope that that we have to stop somewhere and then not that it's deteriorate as the politicians wish in the U.S.
Yeah. Well, the big question really is, and I was on site during the forum where Mr. Wang was talking about this, and there was a question asked, which is how should China react? It's a question of the century for China. When China wants to engage and continue into dialogue with the United States, but the United States doesn't want to engage with China, how should China remedy the problem? How should China approach the subject? Professor Mahoney, when you receive such a message, when you see a barrage of hostile policy, very aggressive policies towards China, how should China react? Has China been doing the sensible thing?
Well, I think that if we have the standard that we have to judge how China reacts to American aggression to determine whether or not China is doing the right thing, that's kind of a slippery slope and unfair to China. But if we want to ask the question, what should China do? I think above all, China should engage those people who want to talk with her. I think she needs to find better ways to have constructive relations with immediate neighbors. The worst thing that could happen to the United States strategy at this point is that China and India work out their differences, that China and Vietnam work out their differences, that South China Sea is resolved. All of these are pressure points that the U.S. is trying to build on to try to contain China. So I think if China is able to have productive dialogue with the EU, with multilateral organizations like the UN, the World Health Organization, the WTO, then all of these things, I think, undermine this negative discussion that's coming out of Washington.
And forget about and ignore the United States for now, maybe, Professor Mahoney.
Well, I don't think. Obviously, you can't ignore the U.S. I mean, you have to have some sort of strategic reaction. But I don't think you want to constantly be engaging someone in a conversation in this reactionary way that basically reduces you to their level. There's nothing you can say at this point to the Trump administration that they're not going to turn around in some negative way. I'm not sure if that changes if Biden wins the election in the fall, but I don't think you should play into the game. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much. Very important discussion. We'll continue having them. Mr. Wang Huiyao, President of the Center for China and Globalization, and Professor Josef Mahoney from East China Normal University.